Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Parenting Through the Parsha with Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
One of the elements of parenting that has consistently been something that has been challenging to figure out, something that has involved ongoing learning, is how to help our kids see consequences of their actions in a way that is accurate and kind and elicits some kind of response beyond just a kind of thrown away cursory sorry and then moving on to just whatever happens next. And within the past couple of days, it became clear that one of our kids had been doing something relatively consistently that they hadn't been fully transparent about. Details don't matter. It's nothing egregious, but just that there was an ongoing pattern of behavior that one of our kids was doing something they really shouldn't have been doing. And it came to light last night. We talked it out. We were frustrated. They were upset. It wasn't great. We talked it out. And as we started moving forward into thinking about logical consequences, et cetera, it became clear that felt really badly about it, that he saw that he had acted in a way that wasn't in line with what he hopes for, what we value as a family, and he felt really badly, not only because he might be in trouble or have there be some kind of consequence that wasn't what he wants, but that it really seemed like there was something within him knew he had slipped up and that there was a real desire to do things differently. I never want to see my kids be upset or unhappy. And if I'm being honest, I'll also own that there was a part of me that was at least a little bit gratified that there's a way in which there's some processing of the world to see that it engenders self-reflection in thinking about how to act differently moving forward. I think that that's really important, and I think that's not a given. At the beginning of Parshat Lecha, there's that phrase, Lecha, which, if you're just looking at it very quickly, when God is saying to Avram, later known as Abraham, just saying, leave where you've been and go to the place that I will show you. Leave your land, your birthplace, your father's house, to the land that I will show you. And pretty much every single commentator sees the seeming redundancy in the verse of Lech Lecha, because it could just say Lech, it could just say go. So why does it say Lech Lecha? And a frequent response is that Avram should be going for himself, not just because God is telling him to, but that this is his own sort of personal journey for himself to find an identity, to find a new way of being in the world, that this is a journey that he is taking on, sort of a hero's journey in some ways into the world to discover who he is and to be this real pioneer, this first Jew. Is going to be someone who's going to set a standard for what it is to be a righteous person, a religious person, however you think about Avram. This is a pioneer, a groundbreaking person in our tradition. And it's not just because God told him so, but there's something that's going to be revealed about himself in the process as well. And I read a slightly different refraction of that from Rabbi Sharon Cohen Anisfeld, who's president of Hebrew College. And she wrote, with God's opening words to Abraham, the Torah reminds us that the journey forward and the journey inward are simultaneous and inseparable. The journey forward and the journey inward are simultaneous and inseparable. That if we're going out into the world, if we're exploring out into the world, there also needs to be an accompanying self-reflective process so that we can learn about ourselves also as we learn more about the world. That there's a real importance in prioritizing. It's not enough that Abraham should be going out and achieving and claiming his mantle as our forefather, that there needs to be some kind of reflection, some kind of identity work, some kind of internal shift along with that geographic shift too. And I think that's interesting to think about. I think that's interesting to reflect on as we think about ourselves as people, as we think about raising kids. And accompanying that are the frequent and not always pleasant lessons about parenting that are peppered all throughout Bereshit, all throughout Genesis. These are people, characters, however you understand them, who do not always make the best choices about what it is to be a parent. They just don't. And there's an interesting moment in this week's Parsha as well, where God tells Abraham, after Abraham has made this journey, God tells Abraham not to fear. Don't be afraid. That moment, Abraham has no heirs, and God tells him not to be afraid. I got you. We'll figure this out. And it's interesting to note to me that the fear acknowledged is involving kids, that it's related to his life as a parent, or in the moment, a lack thereof. But I think it's also fair to extrapolate out from that to recognize that parenting broadly can carry a lot of fear and anxiety before you have kids, right when you have kids, as your kids get older, all kinds of moments for fear and anxiety along the way. And it's important to sit with that. I think it's important to reflect on what are those fears? What is that anxiety? Where is that coming up? Going back to what I was speaking about before, I think for me, one of those real fears I have is, what if my kids can't be in the world in that deep reflective way? I don't want my kids to just be going out into the world in a superficial fashion. I really want them to have that reflective ability to think about the kind of people who they want to be in the world, to have that curiosity about not just the world itself, but themselves as people, to be able to dig deep, to be able to think about their actions, to be able to think, when I make a mistake, what was going on there and how can I do things differently? I think that's essential, at least for me, at least for our household. I think that that's really important. And different people have different fears and different anxieties. It's at least important to get a sense of what those are, because that's a part of what that internal journey is. We're not just out in the world shaping our children. We also need to be engaging in that journey inward as well. And to say something that might be a little redundant, depending on how many of these you've listened to, I think the way that we cultivate that within our kids is by cultivating that within ourselves. That if I want to model for my kids what it is to be curious about myself and how I'm hopefully evolving as a person and how they're hopefully evolving as people, I need to demonstrate that to them as well, to offer a little bit of a window into that reflective capacity, to offer a little bit of a window into, when I make a mistake, here's how I respond. When I'm thinking about how to be an ethical, moral person in the world, here's what I weigh, here's how I think about that. It's not a given that kids will pick up on that. And I maximize the possibility of kids learning that if I can open up a little bit of a window into that myself. And so, yes, it was not a pleasant moment that one of my kids last night wasn't happy seeing what the impact of his choices was. But there was something that held, oddly enough, a little bit of hope that this is a kid who's thinking seriously about who he is in the world and the kind of person that he wants to be, and thinking about his choices. And that's not just about taking a journey out into the world, but taking a journey into the world within. And that takes courage and that takes practice. And so I'm in turn now learning from him that that's possible and that that's a holy thing. And hopefully there can continue to be that reciprocal learning and that reciprocal journeying, because ultimately, if we can do that with each other, that makes the journey at least a little bit easier.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.